Hello, just welcoming you again to the class entitled Managing Stress in the Workplace, Class 1. My name is Dan Guerra and I'll be your instructor today. So here are the class objectives. First, we're going to take a look at exactly what is stress. I think it's important to define what it is we're trying to manage so we know what to look for. Then we'll move on to identification of stress and stress triggers. That is, what are the symptoms and signs of stress within me that I can pay attention to and address when learning some skills? Then we'll take a look at one evidence-based technique in the realm of stress management and do a deeper dive on that. And finally, what is an action plan and how can we put that in place to better meet our goals? So let's take a look at some stress statistics. These are taken from Stress in America surveys conducted by the American Psychological Association from 2013 to 2017. And as we take a look at these, just let the stress stats sink in a bit. See what resonates with you in your work-life experiences or even in your personal life. So chronic work stress is reported by over 1/3 of American workers. And greater than 8 in 10 Americans are attached to their gadgets on a typical day. I'm sure many of us might relate to this. 86% saying they constantly or often checking emails, texts, and social media accounts. Money and work remain the top two sources of either very or somewhat significant stress. Almost 1/3 of adults are reporting that stress has a very strong impact on their body or physical and mental health. 35% indicating communication tech and just that expectation of always being on makes it impossible to stop thinking about work, also contributing to stress. So what is stress? We can see that it has a significant impact on our life experience, including our health and well-being. So there's lots of definitions, and each one has merit. Let's take a look at a few here, and again, just see how these resonate with you. Throughout the class today, you might hear me say, take a moment and see how this resonates with you, or what feeling or experience this leaves you with. That approach that I offer is the beginning, actually, of stress management. It's an invitation to be self-aware and to be connected not only intellectually or rationally to what we're talking about, but experientially and emotionally to what it is that you're doing at the moment. So one definition of stress is that it's a physical, mental, or emotional strain or tension. A second definition is that stress is a physiological or psychological response to a stressor beyond what is needed to accomplish a task. That is, that the response sort of is disproportionate to the situation, let's say. Third, stress can be a persistent psychophysiological condition that results from a perception that's sustained of a threat to survival. So it's the continual experience that you're being threatened, your survival is at stake, and this translates into a psychophysiological condition. So perhaps the most compelling definition, and one that we can work with today, is that stress is any change that you have to adapt to. And as you know, we're always needing to adapt to change in this world because change really is the only constant. And as many of you can probably relate, particularly when reflecting on your work experience, that change is the only constant is really the golden rule or the golden experience, let's say. So along with stress comes many changes within the body and the brain as well. So let's just take a quick look. And don't worry too much about this nerdy brain chart here. I just wanted to give us a bit of background in what happens with the nervous system when we're under stress. So here you have the brain and you have the central nervous system in the middle of the slide. And part of that nervous system is another branch called the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, or ANS, is broken up into the parasympathetic branch on the left and the sympathetic branch on the right. So the autonomic nervous system is what we have learned now in our modern vernacular to refer to as the fight or flight, rest and digest dimension of our nervous system. Sympathetic branch, again on the right, is associated with the fight or flight response, and this is very necessary to our survival. The fight or flight response helps us to deal with imminent threat. Let's take a look at what happens here. So you can see that the biological indicators such as dilation of the pupils to let more light in, and the inhibition or the slowing down of saliva, because digestion is secondary at that moment to survival, and glucose increases to bring energy, quick energy to the body so that we can flee or fight, and then the heart beating faster to move the blood and oxygen to the larger muscles. So why is this happening? Back in the earlier time when we were living in harsher conditions, this might have translated into wild animals that were about to attack, or other humans who might have wanted to destroy or fight us, and other threatening situations. So today, we still experience fight or flight in times of threat, thank goodness. We need that. But the problem now is that unfortunately, we are over-assessing threat in a variety of situations that might not actually be so threatening. And this can cause something that we refer to as sympathetic nervous system over-responding. What happens when we are under a great deal of stress is that the sympathetic nervous system branch kind of takes over, and we can be in danger of living under constant and increasing stress. Or in other words, we move from momentary stress to distress. So the parasympathetic branch on the left is probably obvious to you at this point. The opposite indicators in the body and brain that tell us that it's now okay to rest and digest, that the threat has been removed and it's okay to relax. So clearly, salivation and digestion is restored, heartbeat slows, pupils can now constrict, and we can live with less light, etc. And this balance, or this needed balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of the nervous system, is really what we're shooting for. If we're living in a society, which we are, that is constantly aligning with sympathetic nervous system over-responding, then we need to find ways to help the parasympathetic branch, the rest and digest mode, to be more available to us, easily accessed, and so on. Also, there are more hormones involved with stress than you might first realize, hormones and neurotransmitters. And the ones at the top of the slide, epinephrine, cortisol, and adrenaline, are most associated with stress. And other processes in the brain, serotonin and dopamine, are also related to stress, but as well mood stabilization and feelings of satisfaction, well-being, and happiness, contentment. So let's launch into how we can begin to identify signs and triggers within ourselves that tell us that we may be experiencing stress that could lead to distress. As you can see from this slide, stress shows up on various levels: physiologically, emotionally. There are cognitive or thinking factors that contribute to stress, and also stress shows up behaviorally. Let's take some examples. So physically, we may see things like rapid heart rate without physical exertion, chronic headaches, difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. You could experience indigestion, vomiting, diarrhea or constipation, dryness of the throat and mouth, or even things like nausea, dizziness, feeling exhausted or drained, and that experience of having, we say, butterflies in the stomach, all physical indicators. Emotionally, You may experience apathy or feeling of being on edge, irritable mood, quicker to anger, anxiety, fear of failure, or feelings of loneliness or isolation. In the cognitive or thinking realm, we find things like trouble concentrating or forgetfulness, negative thinking or dwelling on negative thoughts, racing thoughts, being easily embarrassed or preoccupation with self, and in extreme examples, thoughts of suicide or self-harm. And behaviorally, we can notice things like poor judgment, like the use of alcohol or drugs to distract us or relieve us from stress. Emotions like anger and sadness, sleeping more than usual, nervous tics, nail biting or being easily startled, or even isolating yourself from others, or procrastinating or neglecting responsibilities. Let's look at some signs of moderate to high levels of stress. This list is not exhaustive, of course, but can help you to begin to think about where you might fall in the range of stress, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, and how it's showing up for you. So some questions and comments you can ask, are you feeling out of control or overwhelmed? Having difficulty concentrating or remembering things? Have you been more accident prone recently? Experiencing headaches or dizziness? Frequently feeling tired or lacking energy? More incidents of crying or quicker to cry, irritability? Experiencing feelings of depression, helplessness, anxiety, or panic? Have you noticed out of character responses? Increased road rage or snapping or yelling at coworkers, children? Well, after you can identify what might be operating for you personally, we can begin the process of managing stress better, and particularly at the workplace. Well, the first level really has to do with cultivating awareness. And awareness can be developed in three important areas, or touch points, if you will, that are an integral and regular part of everyday experience. For today, we'll look at one of those touch points, and that is the body. The body, we wear it every day, if you could think of it that way. It's with us all the time. It's very accessible, and one might argue it's really the first level of our awareness and experience of self. You remember a few moments ago we discussed physical indicators of stress. Well, today we're going to focus on the body as one area we can begin cultivating awareness so that we can begin to change the physical impact of stress on our lives. The other two areas are breath and mind, which we'll address in future classes as a follow-up to this one. Now, with breath, we begin to harness our awareness and skill with breathing and breath control exercises, which can be very powerful in combating the negative aspects of stress on many levels. And lastly, we'll look at mind. And by mind here, I mean how our thoughts and our inner dialogue impact worry and stress and our internal experience as it pertains to stress. So as mentioned, we'll look at breath and mind in more detail in future classes. Okay, so this is the fun part, at least I think so, in that it's where we put the ideas and notions about stress into practice. So I'd like to introduce to you one of the evidence-based techniques that will address stress in the body, and that's called progressive muscle relaxation, also known as PMR. Now, most people really enjoy this practice, so I hope you will. And before we begin, let me outline a few guidelines for you before we begin. So this is a practice where you do not need to necessarily achieve anything. I hope that comes as somewhat of a relief. Simply play the audio portion, which comes up next, and follow the initial instructions as best you can, and then just listen and follow. You cannot fail at this. And so, for once in our lives, let's turn off that judging mind as best you can And allow yourself to measure your success simply by participating in the practice. Not on how well you relaxed or how well you think you did the practice or any of that sort of thing. This kind of shift in our attention and way of being is part of the stress management practice. So give it your best shot. Now, this practice will take about 28 minutes or so. So try to give yourself ample time to do it without being interrupted. Pick a quiet, relaxing space to practice with dim lighting if possible. So enjoy it and try not to skip ahead. Actually, go through the whole practice. And at this point, when you're finished with the practice, come back and finish the rest of the slides for the class.